In the middle of a busy train station, an 8-year-old black boy gave a secret signal to a police dog. What the dog discovered next would uncover one of the most shocking human trafficking networks in America, and prove that sometimes the smallest heroes walk on 4 legs. In the chaos of Central Station, where the screeching of metal and murmurs of thousands blended into a restless hum, a single German shepherd froze mid-step. His name was Sergeant Rex, an elite K-9 with 6 years of service, countless rescues, and instincts so sharp they had saved lives more than once. But this time, what he felt wasn't routine. His ears perked, his muscles tensed, and his gaze fixed across the crowd like a laser. His handler, Detective James Morrison, noticed the shift immediately. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, scanning the throng of travelers for any obvious threat. Bags left unattended, nervous passengers, anything. But Rex wasn't looking at danger. He was looking at a child. Across the platform stood an elegantly dressed white woman in her late 30s, polished from head to toe, her pearl earrings glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. Beside her, clutching her hand, was a small black boy. Barely 8 years old, his clothes neat, but his expression hollow. He stared ahead, not speaking, not smiling. Then, almost imperceptibly, he did something strange. He tapped his small fingers 5 times on the woman's back. A quick, rhythmic pattern. Tap, 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 tap. Subtle, repeated, and desperate. Rex tilted his head, his dark eyes narrowing. Morrison followed his dog's gaze and saw nothing unusual, just a family waiting for the 3:30 Seattle train. The father, a tall man in a navy coat, scrolled casually on his phone. The mother adjusted her scarf. Only the boy looked out of place, his stillness unnatural, his eyes darting at every sound. Then he tapped again, 5 times. The same rhythm. Rex growled low, a warning. Morrison frowned. "Easy, Rex," he murmured, but Rex didn't budge. Instead, he stared at the boy like he understood something no one else did. The family began to move toward the boarding gate. The crowd surged, announcements echoed, and the smell of metal and coffee filled the air. Morrison tried to pull Rex along, but the dog resisted, planting his paws firmly on the platform. He barked once, sharp and clear, the sound cutting through the station noise. The elegant woman glanced back briefly, tightening her grip on the boy's hand. Tommy flinched. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. Rex's fur bristled. Something deep inside him knew. This wasn't right. As the crowd swallowed the family, Morrison's instincts as a detective kicked in. He couldn't explain it, but he'd learned long ago to trust Rex. The dog's senses had never failed him. He knelt beside Rex, his eyes following the boy until the train doors closed. "You saw something, didn't you?" he muttered. The train whistled, ready to depart, and Rex whined softly, almost pleading. Morrison's stomach turned. 3 weeks earlier, miles away, little Tommy Wilson had been playing in his grandmother's backyard in Louisiana. The sun was warm, and the air smelled of jasmine. 2 smiling men had approached wearing badges that read "Child Services." They spoke kindly, offering candy, telling his grandmother they needed to verify paperwork for his schooling. By the time she realized something was wrong, the black van was already gone. Tommy woke up hours later in a house filled with strangers, children of all colors, all silent, all scared. Margaret and Richard Whitefield told him he was special, that he'd been chosen to live with them. But Tommy was too smart for lies. He saw the locks on the doors, the coded conversations, the suitcases full of children's clothes. He tried to run once. They caught him. The punishment left bruises he still hid under his long sleeves. One night, while cleaning the living room, he saw a documentary on police K-9 units. He watched a segment showing how dogs could respond to coded signals, taps, gestures, sounds. He memorized it, especially the part about 5 short taps meaning distress. It was his secret, his only plan. Now, standing in Central Station, that plan was all he had left. He knew the police often had dogs, and when he saw Rex's uniform harness marked Police K-9, his heart pounded with hope for the first time in weeks. The 5 taps were his cry for help, but the moment passed too fast, and fear returned. As the train began to move, Morrison stood by the platform, his eyes still on the departing cars. Rex barked again, straining against the leash. The detective exhaled slowly. "You think that kid's in trouble, don't you?" he whispered. Rex whined, pawing the ground. Morrison felt the unease settle heavy in his chest. He noted the train number, 247 bound for Seattle, and the time, 3:30 sharp. He didn't know why, but he wrote it down. The last car disappeared into the horizon, leaving behind only silence and the faint echo of Rex's final bark. Morrison gave the leash a gentle tug. "Come on, partner," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. As they walked away, Rex kept looking back, his gaze locked on the empty tracks as if watching a ghost. What neither of them knew was that deep inside that moving train, Tommy sat stiffly beside the woman who called herself his mother, his small hand trembling on his lap. He had tried. He had sent his signal. He didn't know if anyone understood. But as he looked out the window, he saw, far behind, a black and tan German shepherd staring after him, unmoving, unwavering, and for the first time since his abduction, Tommy allowed himself to hope. Because even though he was trapped, even though no one had spoken a word, that one bark felt like a promise. Rex didn't know it yet, but he had just locked eyes with a child, whose fate would soon intertwine with his own, and whose silent signal was about to ignite a chain of events that would shake the nation. The Seattle-bound train sliced through the fading afternoon light, its rhythmic clatter echoing down the steel tracks. Inside, the air was a blend of perfume, coffee, and quiet conversation. But at seat 17B, the tension was invisible and sharp as glass. Tommy Wilson sat beside Margaret Whitefield, his small hands folded tightly on his knees, pretending to be calm. Every movement, every breath was measured. He knew even a wrong glance could trigger her wrath. Margaret's manicured fingers rested on his shoulder, the grip deceptively gentle. She leaned closer, her voice low and venomous. "You'll keep your mouth shut this time, won't you, darling?" She whispered, her breath hot against his ear. "You remember what happens when you don't." Tommy nodded, forcing a weak smile as his eyes darted toward the window. Outside, the world sped past, a blur of towns, trees, and freedom he couldn't touch. 3 rows back, Detective James Morrison adjusted his cap and kept his gaze on the boy. He and Rex had quietly boarded the train at the last second, trusting the dog's instincts more than any evidence. They blended in among passengers, Morrison pretending to read a newspaper, Rex lying obediently at his feet but watching everything. The detective's gut told him this family wasn't what they seemed. He couldn't make an arrest, not without proof, but something about their precision, their too perfect manners, screamed rehearsed. Morrison noticed the man, Richard Whitefield, clutching a black backpack on his lap as though it held treasure. He never let it out of his sight, not even when the conductor passed by. The woman's eyes followed everyone who looked their way, assessing, calculating. And the boy's stillness wasn't calmness. It was fear turned to habit. Morrison had seen it before in victims too young to speak but old enough to understand danger. Tommy's mind was racing. His heart pounded like a trapped bird inside his chest. The last time he had tried to signal for help was at a grocery store 2 days ago. He'd whispered, "Help me," to a cashier when Margaret went to pay, but Richard had seen. The slap that followed still echoed in his memory. He knew this was his last chance. He looked across the aisle. There it was again, the German shepherd. Big, focused, familiar. The same eyes that had met his at the station now looked right at him. His pulse jumped. Rex was here. The dog had followed. That meant someone had heard him. Someone believed him. Hope flickered, fragile but alive. Tommy risked a glance at Richard, who was scrolling through his phone, whispering words like "delivery confirmed" and "client ready." The same words Tommy had heard late at night when Richard thought the children were asleep. He remembered hearing other names. 2, boys and girls who never came back after. Trips. It had taken him weeks to understand what kind of family he'd been sold into. Margaret adjusted her gloves and smiled, politely at a passing attendant, her tone syrupy sweet. "Hot chocolate for my son, please. He's had such a long day." The attendant nodded warmly. Tommy lowered his gaze, knowing every act of kindness from strangers was another layer of his prison. When the attendant walked away, Margaret's smile dropped like a mask. Her nails dug into his arm. "One word," she whispered, "and you'll wish you'd never been born." Across the car, Morrison's trained eye caught the exchange. His chest tightened. He didn't need audio to read that kind of body language. Abuser and victim. It was all there. He looked down at Rex. The dog's ears twitched. Then Tommy did something subtle. He shifted slightly in his seat, pointed one trembling finger toward the black backpack, and then, very faintly, began to tap his leg. 5 short beats. Rex reacted immediately. A low growl rumbled in his throat, almost too soft for others to hear. Morrison's attention snapped toward the boy. His instincts burned. The same 5-tap rhythm, the signal from the station. Morrison's pulse quickened. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you, kid?" He whispered under his breath. The conductor began checking tickets nearby. Richard stiffened. His hand tightened around the backpack as though afraid someone might touch it. Margaret smiled too widely, her laugh forced. Morrison watched carefully, noting every detail. When the conductor passed, Richard exhaled heavily, muttering under his breath. Rex picked up on his nervous scent instantly. Then it happened again. Tommy tapped, tap, 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 and this time Rex barked once. Not loud, but sharp enough to turn a few heads. Margaret froze. Her eyes snapped toward the boy. "What did I tell you?" She hissed, her voice breaking with anger. Tommy's lips parted, but he said nothing. She squeezed his wrist hard enough to make him wince. Her words came out like ice. "Next time you disobey, you'll meet the basement again. You remember the basement?" Tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them back. He'd learned crying only made them angrier. Margaret smiled again for the passengers, pretending everything was fine, while her nails drew half-moon marks into his skin. Morrison clenched his fists under the table. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, but the law was a cage. Without evidence, his badge meant nothing. He glanced toward the backpack again, imagining the contents. Documents, IDs, photos of missing kids. Proof. It had to be there. He needed to get close without alerting them. The train began to sway faster as it neared Portland. The lights flickered briefly as they passed through a tunnel, bathing the car in strobing darkness. In that moment, Tommy looked straight at Rex again, his eyes wide, full of silent pleading. The dog's gaze met his, steady, unblinking. Morrison whispered, "Hang in there, kid. We see you." Outside, the rain began to fall, streaking the windows with cold silver lines. The passengers settled into quiet conversation, unaware that a silent war for one child's life was unfolding just a few feet away. Rex's tail flicked once, his body tense as a coiled spring. He could sense it: fear, danger, lies. Margaret adjusted her coat, Richard checked his watch, and Tommy sat still as stone, every muscle locked in place. The train thundered onward toward Portland, the distance between the boy and his freedom shrinking by the minute. Somewhere deep inside him, Tommy made a silent promise to himself. If the train stopped, he would try again. He didn't know if he'd survive it, but he had to try. His gaze met Rex's once more. Two souls bound by instinct, by courage, by something unspoken. The dog gave a low rumble, his signal of understanding, and as the lights flickered once more, the boy whispered to himself, almost inaudible over the clatter of wheels, "Please, don't let me disappear." The train roared through the dark, carrying with it both a monster's secret and a child's last hope. Time was running out. The train rattled through the countryside, its steel wheels grinding against the tracks as dusk began to settle outside. The air inside the compartment had grown thick with tension. Detective James Morrison kept his gaze fixed on the family from across the aisle, his coffee untouched and growing cold. Rex lay at his feet, still as stone but alert, eyes watching every movement. Morrison's instincts screamed that this was more than a child in trouble. This was organized, rehearsed, and deliberate. He needed proof. Without it, all he had were suspicions. Helen Rodriguez, the train conductor, moved down the aisle, checking tickets with a tired smile. She was a kind woman in her 40s, the kind who remembered regular passengers by name. When Morrison caught her eye, he rose slightly and motioned her over. Keeping his voice low, he asked, "That boy, the one with the woman in the red scarf, you notice anything off about them?" Helen frowned, glancing toward the seats. "The little boy? Yeah, he looked scared earlier. I thought maybe he was just shy." Morrison nodded grimly. "Trust your instincts, ma'am. Mine's telling me something's wrong." Meanwhile, Tommy sat rigid beside Margaret, his stomach twisting in knots. The train hummed beneath his feet, and the air felt heavier with every mile. He'd seen Morrison talking to the conductor, and hope flickered again. But he knew one wrong move could end it all. He clutched his stomach suddenly, wincing. "Ma'am," he whispered weakly, "I don't feel good." Margaret's eyes darted to him, cold and calculating. "You're fine," she said sharply. "Sit still." But Tommy pressed the act. "Please. I think I'm going to throw up." Margaret sighed in irritation. The last thing she needed was attention. "Fine," she hissed. "Lisa, take him." Lisa, a frail blonde girl about 10 years old, sat 2 rows ahead, her eyes empty and frightened. She stood quickly, nodding. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret leaned closer to her. "Keep him in sight. You know what happens if you don't." Lisa nodded again, trembling. They made their way down the narrow corridor toward the bathroom. The rhythmic clatter of the train drowned out their footsteps. When the door closed behind them, Tommy turned to her, his voice urgent but soft. "Lisa," he whispered, "do you want to see your family again?" She froze, staring at him. "They told me my mom's gone," she murmured. "They lied," he said. "We can still get out. But I need your help." Lisa's lower lip quivered. "How?" Tommy glanced around. "When we go back, I'm going to drop a note for the conductor. Don't look at me when I do it. Just act normal." Tears welled in Lisa's eyes, the first he'd seen from her since he arrived at the house weeks ago. For a moment, hope flickered across her small face, fragile but real. Tommy's whisper turned fierce. "We can't stay quiet anymore." She nodded shakily. "Okay." Back in the passenger car, Morrison leaned toward Helen again. "Can you check their tickets? Ask for identification. See how they react." Helen hesitated. That might scare them. Morrison gave her a steady look. "Good, let's see what happens when they're scared." Helen adjusted her conductor cap, squared her shoulders, and walked back toward the family. Margaret's smile flicked on instantly, practiced and perfect. "Is there a problem?" she asked sweetly. Helen smiled back. "Just a routine document check, ma'am. Company policy for families traveling with minors." Richard froze mid-motion. "Documents?" he repeated. "We've already shown our tickets." Helen nodded. "Yes, but I'll need to see ID for the children, too." Margaret's voice sharpened. "We don't have to prove anything." "This is absurd." But Richard was already fumbling through the black backpack, pulling out papers. His hands shook slightly as he flipped through them. Birth certificates, adoption papers, all too new, too clean. Helen's eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. At that exact moment, Tommy and Lisa were returning to their seats. As they passed Helen, Tommy's small hand slipped behind his back, and a folded piece of paper dropped to the floor near her shoe. He didn't look back. Helen noticed it instantly, crouching to pick it up when the family's attention shifted. She unfolded it behind her clipboard, eyes scanning the shaky handwriting. The message was short, but devastating. "We are not their children. Help. There are 12 of us. Black Backpack has proof." Helen's breath caught. Her eyes darted to Morrison, who caught her subtle nod. He rose immediately, pretending to stretch as he made his way toward her. She slipped the paper into his hand without a word. He read it once, and the world seemed to tilt. This was it, the confirmation he needed. His pulse raced. "Good work," he whispered. "Stay calm. Don't let them suspect anything." Margaret's voice rose behind them, sharp and defensive. "I don't see why this is necessary," she snapped at Helen. "We've done nothing wrong." Richard muttered something about lawyers and privacy. Morrison stepped closer, pretending to adjust his seat. Rex's ears perked up, his low growl barely audible. Morrison leaned toward his radio and whispered into his sleeve mic. Dispatch, this is Detective Morrison. Confirm active kidnapping, train 247, car 7. Repeat, car 7. Static crackled before a calm voice replied, Copy that, Detective. Do you have visual confirmation? Morrison's jaw clenched. We have a note from the child confirming abduction, 12 victims total, evidence in a black backpack. The dispatcher hesitated. Negative confirmation. Without visual proof, we can't authorize intervention until Portland Station. Morrison exhaled sharply through his nose, fury simmering under control. Negative? You expect me to wait while these people disappear with a child? The line crackled again, then went silent. He turned his gaze back to the family. Margaret was whispering furiously to Richard now, both of them visibly shaken. They sensed something was wrong. Rex tensed, ready to move. Morrison's heart pounded. 7 minutes. That's all he had until the train reached Portland. 7 minutes to prove the truth before they vanished again. He whispered to himself, more a promise than a plan. Then I'll get it. The train thundered through the gathering storm, the wind howling outside as if echoing the urgency inside. Tommy sat silently, watching Morrison from across the aisle, and for the first time, he saw it. The detective's eyes locked on him, determined and unyielding. Somewhere deep inside, Tommy felt courage rising. He had done it. He had sent the message. Now, all they had to do was survive the next 7 minutes. The train screeched softly as it began to slow near Portland Station. The air inside car 7 felt heavier than ever, a storm waiting to break. Tommy's small hands trembled, but not with fear. This time, it was determination. He looked at Lisa, the girl who had begun to trust him, and whispered, When I say now, you scream. Don't stop. Everyone must hear you. She nodded, her eyes darting toward Margaret, who sat stiffly across the aisle, pretending to read a magazine while keeping a hawk's eye on both children. Richard sat beside her, nervously gripping the black backpack, the same one that carried their Dark Empire's proof. Morrison, still pretending to be an ordinary passenger, subtly reached for his radio. Rex sat quietly under his seat, his golden brown eyes locked on Tommy, sensing the final act was about to begin. Helen, the conductor, re-entered the car, clipboard in hand, her expression sharp and controlled. Ma'am, she said, addressing Margaret politely but firmly, we need to re-verify your documents. There's been a report of inconsistencies. Margaret's face twitched, her composure cracking. This is ridiculous, she hissed. We've already shown our papers. But Helen didn't budge. Regulations, ma'am. I'll need the children's birth certificates and IDs. Richard opened the black backpack, fumbling. Sweat dripped down his temple. For the first time, other passengers started noticing the tension. Their heads turned. The hum of suspicion began to fill the car. Tommy seized the moment. He stood abruptly and said, I need to use the bathroom again. Margaret glared but waved him off impatiently, focused on Helen. As soon as he reached the hallway, Tommy turned to Lisa and whispered, Now. Lisa took a deep breath, then let out a piercing scream that cut through the entire train. We are not their children. They kidnapped us. The car erupted in chaos. Passengers gasped, standing up. Margaret jumped to her feet, face drained of color. She's lying, she shouted, her voice cracking. But before she could move, Tommy bolted from the hallway, his voice shaking but loud enough to echo across every carriage. My name is Tommy Wilson. I live in Tacoma with my Grandma Ruth. They took me from my backyard. Please help us. Every head turned. Phones came out. Someone started recording. Helen stepped between the panicking couple and the children, her body trembling but steady. Step back, she commanded. Morrison sprang from his seat, flashing his badge. Detective Morrison, Seattle PD, he barked. In an instant, Rex leaped forward, growling deeply, standing between the terrified children and their captors. The powerful German shepherd's stance alone froze Richard in place. He tried to run, pushing past the aisle, but Rex lunged, grabbing his sleeve and dragging him to the ground. Margaret screamed, but before she could reach her husband, Morrison opened the black backpack. His eyes widened as he pulled out what looked like a small fortune in evil, dozens of forged birth certificates, passports with children's photos, and a ledger filled with coded names. The passengers stared in horror as the truth spilled into the open. Tommy reached into his small jacket pocket and produced something no one expected, a tiny tape recorder. "I've been recording them," he said softly, his voice breaking. "Every phone call, every meeting. They talked about other kids in other states." He handed it to Morrison, tears welling in his eyes. "Please find them." Morrison's throat tightened. He radioed in immediately, his voice shaking with urgency. "This is Detective Morrison, confirming multiple child abduction suspects on train 247. We have solid proof and surviving victims. Request full FBI and SWAT response at Portland Station." By the time the train rolled to a stop, sirens were already echoing outside. Armed officers and FBI agents flooded the platform. Margaret and Richard were pulled out in handcuffs as crowds of passengers applauded and cried. Tommy and Lisa clung to each other, shaking but free. Rex stood tall, his chest heaving, his metal gleaming faintly under the station lights. Morrison knelt beside Tommy and said quietly, "You did it, kid. You saved more than just yourself today." Months passed, and the story made national headlines. In a packed courtroom, Tommy sat confidently beside his grandmother, now safe, his courage lighting up the room. With calm intelligence, he testified against the Whitefields, his recorded evidence dismantling a national child trafficking network that had stretched across 7 states. 86 children were rescued. 43 arrests were made. Families were reunited. The courtroom broke into tears as the judge commended Tommy's bravery, calling him a hero beyond his years. Rex received a Medal of Honor for exceptional service. Detective Morrison was promoted to chief investigator for the National Child Recovery Task Force. Helen Rodriguez, the conductor who risked her job and her safety, founded a non-profit organization to train public workers in recognizing signs of trafficking. Their names became symbols of hope, but none more than Tommy's. In the final scene, Tommy sits on a couch beside his grandmother, smiling shyly during a live TV interview. The host asks, "Tommy, how did you find the courage to fight back?" The boy looks down for a moment, then meets the camera with steady eyes. "They thought I was small and scared," he says softly. "But Grandma always told me, when you can't fight with strength, fight with your mind." His grandmother nods, tears glistening in her eyes, as the audience rises in applause. As the camera pans out, the narrator's voice fades in, steady and powerful. Sometimes the smallest warriors fight the biggest battles and win. In a world where evil hides behind smiles, courage doesn't always roar. It whispers, taps 5 times, and waits to be heard. The screen fades to black, leaving only the echo of a hero's heartbeat and the promise that justice, no matter how silent it begins, always finds its voice.